Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. This is not like my regular content at all, but several of you have asked for my testimony on my journey to Christ, how I went from atheist to Orthodox Christian. Technically, how I went from atheist to pagan unknowingly. I unknowingly had pagan beliefs to now a baptized Orthodox Christian. I think people may be interested in my testimony specifically because I was not raised Christian. My parents were not self-professed atheists, but they were definitely not Christian. And there was actually a lot of callousness towards Christianity in my household about how ridiculous Christianity is. Certain family members would refer to God irreverently as Sky Daddy and talked about the ridiculousness of sin and hell and how all Christians are hypocrites and think they're better than everyone. So I actually grew up with a lot of negative misconceptions about Christianity, and to some people in my family, it's a complete wonder how I became Christian. And let me just tell you, in a way, I am almost surprised myself still. The fact that I know God actually exists now after spending so much time completely against the existence of God, thinking to believe in him was ridiculous and naive, still bewilders me in some ways because he is just that amazing and a mystery still in so many ways. Having a personal experience, a personal encounter with God is crucial when it comes to moving away from atheism, because believing in God is more than simply knowing a lot about apologetics and theology and why blind evolution is statistically impossible. It's about having a personal, organic, living, growing relationship with God. You pray to him, you personally experience and feel his presence in your life, you feel his grace. So ultimately, I believe in God now, not simply because I have very good logical reasons to believe that a God exists. I believe in God now because I've had personal encounters with God that I tried to explain away initially as illusions or delusions, but I just could not explain him away anymore. I had to come to terms with the fact that for all of those years, I was utterly wrong about the nature of the world, the universe, truth, what love is, everything. That there's actually a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, omnipotent, omnipresent, omniscient, uncreated, personal, moral being out there, and he intentionally created the universe, the world, life, absolutely everything, and that he, beyond a reasonable doubt, became incarnate as Jesus Christ. I have come to realize that you cannot convince someone that God exists with logic and words. It's like trying to convince someone that a piece of music is beautiful without them personally listening to it and experiencing it for themselves. You need to have a personal encounter with God to truly have faith in him. So I completely understand why so many people don't believe in him. So that was the intro. The first part of the video is going to be about how I came to know Christ personally, my personal journey to know Christ as the one true God, sort of the heart of my testimony. And the second part of the video is going to include some main logically based apologetics as to why Christ is God and why I chose to be an Orthodox Christian over Roman Catholicism, Protestantism, and non-denominationalism. And that'll be the mind of the video per se. And for any atheists out there watching this out of curiosity, I commend you for having an open mind. And I would genuinely like to ask, do you think I'm delusional? Do you think that all theists are delusional? Do you think that I've deluded myself into believing I felt God's presence? And if that could be the case, then why aren't I delusional in other areas of my life? Many atheists I've talked to have said that they really respect the traditional Christian way of life and many Christian values, but how could the Christian way of life, full of sacrifice, wholesomeness, family, have such an abundance of good fruit if it's ultimately the result of a great delusion? Are the Christian traditions and morals that so many of us agree with and practice, such as sacrificial love, humility, service, gratitude, compassion, endurance, the result of one great big delusion or lie? I would genuinely like to know the answers to those questions and have a dialogue. I remember when I was around 5 or 6 years old, I actually, for no good reason whatsoever, because my parents did not teach me about God, asked my father for a prayer book. And I'm not even kidding. I wanted to get to know God. I was extremely curious about God as a youngster, and I still remember the prayer book I had. It was a beige, yellowish book, and I absolutely adored it. I remember even hugging it. I wanted to know God ardently without even having been properly introduced to the idea of God. And I think it's because children have not been hardened by sin yet. They have not actively and intentionally separated themselves from God yet. And this is actually, not surprisingly, in the Bible as well. Matthew chapter 18, verse 1 through 5. Truly, I tell you, anyone who will not receive the kingdom of God like a little child will never enter it. Meaning that we should have an open, honest, humble, unbridled faith like a child. And I had that faith as a child. I knew God existed innately and I wanted to get to know him. And I don't remember much else about my faith in God as a kid, but I do know I eventually moved away from him, partly because a good friend of mine in elementary school, she was a Protestant Christian, told me that if I didn't believe in Jesus Christ, I was going to hell. And that scared me so much that I told my dad about it, and I told him that I was very scared that I'm going to go to hell if I didn't have faith in Jesus Christ. And he said, that's ridiculous, you're not going to hell. And that's where his callousness towards Christianity began, I think, because he thought Christians were trying to scare his child into becoming Christian, which to his credit is not a good way to proselytize at all. No Christian should try to scare a non-Christian into becoming a Christian, because fear-based faith is not real faith. Fear-based devotion is not real devotion. Although my dear friend, she was so young, she didn't know what she was doing. My first real introduction to Christianity by a self-professed Christian, my dear young friend, was that of fire and brimstone and torture. I was disgusted by this idea that God sends people to this horrid place for simply not believing in him. It sounded narcissistic, arbitrary, cruel. I wanted nothing to do with a religion like that. So I still loved my friend, but was very much personally against Christianity, thinking the Christian God is some kind of cruel, arbitrary dictator. Now I understand that if you don't want to be with God, then he is not going to force you into his presence. And that's essentially what hell is. It's not necessarily a place without God, because God is omnipresent. He is everywhere, so that logically must include hell. It's more like you receive his energies in a negative manner. And if you don't want his blessings to be in full communion with him in his kingdom, he loves you enough to respect your decision and sends your soul someplace else, and that's Hades. And yes, hell is horrible because God is the source of all blessings and goodness. But if you don't want his blessings and goodness, he's not going to make you be a part of his kingdom. Anyways, this negative attitude towards the idea of God as this sort of arbitrary, cruel dictator paired with the current godless state of this nation plunged me deep into atheism and inexorably leftism, and I may make a video on why I left the left, because there's a lot to dive into regarding liberalism and how liberalism and Satanism are inextricably linked, and I'm not even kidding. Philosophically speaking, there's a huge link between liberalism and Satanism. The reason why atheism is inherently a left-wing ideology is because the left's only moral concerns are material, with no regard to virtue or higher spirituality. Religion by nature reminds man of virtue and the unseen and unknown, which of course reminds us of how low we are compared to virtue. And leftists reject standards like hierarchy and transcendent morality because they're simply concerned with the complete liberation of the individual and see objective morality and hierarchy as unnecessary burdens with a few fleeting caveats that they're not even consistent on, like they'll be against murder but will support abortion. And atheism also is only concerned with the material with no regard to objective virtue or spirituality. The Christian individual, though, acknowledges nature. He acknowledges that there are natural differences. Some things are objectively better than others, that some people are better or more skilled in certain areas. He acknowledges that human nature is flawed because we are fallen, and because of this, he does not support silly utopian ideas like we can all just coexist because they would never work. And of course, they failed every time they've been tried. The Christian individual understands the inescapable nature of hierarchy and thus chooses to live in accordance with it instead of trying to challenge it. And that is why the Christian would be content to serve in heaven, as the perfect Creator's will is undoubtedly superior to any created beings, instead of desiring to reign in hell. The modernist or postmodernist is the opposite. Nature must be bent to the will of the individual, no matter how contrary to reality, and no vice should be condemned other than what harms others, except for the unborn, of course, for instance. Classical liberalism, progressivism, socialism, and communism are all of the same spirit. When individual license is more important than the sovereignty of God, then the result will always be the same. To the left-wing individual, there's no such thing as culture, gender, borders, God, morality. It's all man-made or a social construct, and you are bound by none of it. It's all about you. It's all about the individual and utter positive freedom to do as thou wilt, as the famous occultist Aleister Crowley has said. And because in liberalism everyone is the same and nature is nothing but a concept, the only thing that binds us are all socially constructed, and therefore if I wanted to identify as a man, I can by simply declaring it because I'm a very autonomous individual. If I want to abort my child because the child will interfere with my desires, and when stripped of all nature and identity, all that remains to define me is my desires, I will abort my child. And in atheism, fundamentally, choices are simply based on emotion or self-professed common sense, because in the atheistic worldview, there's no God, no transcendence, no transcendent morality that extends beyond the individual, and therefore no objective morality, no objective hierarchy of values, and therefore atheism is fundamentally a form of anarchy and is left-wing. When someone denies God, they will put a false idol in his place on the altar of their heart. And if one completely denies the transcendent, only materialist ideologies have room to sort of fill that void. And I am not at all saying that atheists cannot behave morally or that Christians are more moral than atheists, because that is not true. We're all sinners and have all failed to live up to God's standard. None of us are better than the next person, but atheists cannot justify morality. You cannot justify objective morality if there is no standard beyond humanity, and atheists will typically deny this because they know innately that morality is objective, because we're all made in the image of God and we all have the law written on our hearts. But if you're atheist and you reject transcendence, then there is no moral standard beyond humanity, and it is purely relative and subject to change. Think about it. If you believe in blind evolution, mud to man, and nothing is constant except for change, then morality also changes. As well as this, if our minds are not designed for the purpose of thinking, of reasoning, then how in the world would we be able to trust our own faculties, our own thoughts, our own convictions? Darwin himself asked this question. He said, "But then with me the horrid doubt always arises whether the convictions of man's mind, which has developed from the mind of lower animals, are of any value or at all trustworthy. Would anyone trust in the convictions of a monkey's mind if there are any convictions in such a mind?" Anyways, because I was an atheist, I also got involved with leftism a bit. Not so much that I became a complete debaucherous degenerate, but I did think of myself as a feminist. I believed that all religions basically teach the same thing. I bought into gender theory. I was pro-choice. So, essentially I was your average atheistic liberal between probably 16 to 19 years old. And during that time, I dated a guy who was on house arrest for 2 years of our relationship, and then in prison for another year of our relationship. I almost married him too. did not make great choices during those years. Nope, nope, nope. And then when I was 19, I went on a trip to Europe to visit family in England and my best friend in Italy who was going to college there. And someone, not my friend, but who will remain nameless for privacy, introduced me to the power of divination with a dowsing pendulum. And in case you don't know what divination is, it's a pagan practice in which you try to foretell future events or discover hidden knowledge by interpreting omens or by the aid of supernatural powers, explicitly condemned in the Bible in Deuteronomy, by the way. So I would use this pendulum I got from this person to make decisions. I don't remember exactly how I read it, but I think if it swung vertical, it was a yes, and if it swung horizontal, it was a no. So I'd ask this thing all sorts of questions throughout the week, and whatever way it sort of swung was my answer, and I'd go with it. It did not fare too well. I may have asked the pendulum if I should marry the guy in prison, and because I canceled our appointment at the courthouse within just an hour of the appointment, I'm guessing the pendulum swung yes to that question, and that would have been a disaster. The thing is, practicing spirituality with ambiguous pagan rituals is essentially, in my opinion, a cope. We want to commune with the divine, we want to be a part of spirituality, but we don't want the moral accountability that comes with organized religion. So instead, we seek out spirituality from these idolatrous practices so we can feel spiritual without having to give up our oh so precious sin that we unfortunately are very much attached to, such as pride, selfishness, indolence, vanity, fornication, etc. And in case you're unfamiliar, paganism is an umbrella term. It's made up of practically anything outside of Abrahamic origin. Within pagan religions, there's really no structure like there is in Judaism, Christianity, or Islam. If you talk to an American pagan, they very well may simply tell you to go research paganism for yourself and just dive into whichever religion or practice feels right for you and which interests you the most. The pagan practice you choose to participate in is essentially entirely based on emotion and arbitrary curiosity, which is strange because if you talked to a Norse pagan who believes in Norse gods, so Odin, Thor, Loki, etc., they won't necessarily have an issue with you taking an interest in Hellenism, Zeus, Poseidon, Hera, etc., because pagans believe that every single conceivable god exists, and the pagan simply chooses which god or gods to worship due to usually the culture they're born into, or someone who was not raised in a specific pagan-centered culture but is interested in paganism will just arbitrarily choose which set of gods to worship, or they just may worship all of them in some very personal, unstructured manner. And that's because the pagan isn't actually concerned with truth. They don't deny this either. Pagans will admit that paganism is not about believing the right things. I saw this pagan website that actually said that believing in one truth is a very new Western idea. Like in the East, Christianity is this super ambiguous, loose religion where it's all about the individual and what the individual thinks is right, which is exactly wrong. You can also piece the pagan practice together yourself. You can nitpick what you want to practice, how you want to practice it, which parts of the religion you don't want to partake in. It's very subjective and without structure, and again, not concerned with validity or truth really, only your truth, which is not truth at all. And that's what was attractive to me about these pagan practices that I did not know were pagan at the time. I felt like I was communing with the divine, partaking in spirituality, but there was no structure I had to keep up with, no behavioral nor moral accountability whatsoever, so I could still partake in sin, which I did not know I was a slave to at the time. I didn't have to wake up before 8 on Sundays to go to church or try to change my behavior for the better. I just had to keep doing what I was doing and partaking in whichever pagan practices felt right to me at the time, and then stop for whatever reason, pick up where I left off or not. It is directionless and chaotic, and the uncertainty and chaos is not good for your mental well-being whatsoever. So that was me until I I think, turned 21 years old, I want to say, and I just inexplicably stopped prioritizing any kind of spirituality in my life. I was just concerned with work and friends and stuff, and the spiritual aspect of my life just took a complete sidestep. And that is until I had a conversation with a friend about morality one day. This was a completely random discussion too. She was trying to explain how morality is purely subjective, purely relative, and changes over time. And I, even being effectively atheistic at the time, even after my little unknown pagan phase, I was not convinced. She was talking about how murder, for instance, is not necessarily objectively moral, even though she personally believed it's immoral. She was also talking about how that could change in a couple of centuries because morality changes all the time. And although I was certain there was objective morality, I could not justify it at all without saying, well, if there's a God, then there is objective morality. And she admitted that I was right. If there is a God, then there is objective morality. And that was the first conversation I really ever had about objective morality that woke me up to the truth about what my belief system is and how unbelievably flawed it is. But I did not want to let go of my atheistic beliefs that easily. I was convinced that there's some atheistic argument out there for objective morality that made coherent sense. So I constantly sought out arguments of the most revered atheistic thinkers like Christopher Hitchens, Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, Stephen Hawking, and I read random atheistic threads online, watched videos, read books, and I could not find one coherent argument for objective morality, not a modicum of one. They would just say something very personal like, I can only hope my fellow man would love and respect me the same way I love and respect him, blah, blah, blah. Or they'd make an argument that morals help mankind to flourish or progress further without explaining why it's good that mankind flourishes. So these atheistic thinkers would always become so obtuse when challenged with the topic of objective morality, and it was extremely frustrating for me because I did not believe in God, but understood the necessity of God's existence for objective morality to exist. And after finally understanding that, I began to identify effectively as a deist. I believed in God, but just not the Christian God, because the entire story of a God-man born of a virgin who came to earth to sacrifice himself for our sins, performing miracles and resurrecting from the dead seemed like a fairy tale, even though I don't like saying that because it's irreverent. It seemed out of the realm of possibility, even though if I believed in an all-powerful God, surely he would have the power to perform miracles and resurrect from the dead. I just did not make that connection at the time. And around this time, I inexplicably began to connect more with an old friend of mine who is now my husband and the father of my unborn baby. And he was and still is, of course, an Orthodox Christian who came to Christ independently after a very long spiritual journey himself. And before we began dating, my now husband invited me to his Orthodox church. And initially, I won't lie, I just wanted to have a nice place to go once a week and connect with wholesome people. I was not really interested in Christianity at all yet. And then my now husband gifted me this icon and this prayer book, and I thought, what the heck, I'll just take a crack at it. So I began to pray with it with the prayers in the book and reading from the Bible. And shortly after starting to do this, I began to experience a profound kind of peace that I never experienced before. And I noticed that often I overthought things much less. I was significantly less anxious in my day-to-day life. And I was intrigued. And then I began to try to have a more personal approach to this spirituality thing. I not only utilized the prayer book and the Bible, I tried talking to God myself and asked him over and over, okay, are you actually there? Is someone there? Is someone listening? If you're listening, please let me know. If someone is there, please let me know. Please reveal yourself to me. And I kept on asking him. And one day, it was a random Wednesday afternoon, I remember it well, I came home and I felt the the urge to pray out of the blue. So I pulled out my prayer book and I recited a prayer from Saint Basil the Great. And all of a sudden, this unbelievable feeling rushed over me. The only way for me to really describe it is like, it's like the opposite of having your heart broken. Take the pain of having your heart completely shattered and reverse that level of extreme pain into extreme joy. It was not necessarily pleasurable. It was just this pure sensation of love, comfort, belonging, and peace. And comfort really being the operative word there. It was comfort, which is another name for the Holy Spirit, the Comforter. It was maybe 15 minutes of this pure feeling of comfort and love. And I cried probably harder than I ever have cried before. And in that moment, I knew it was God. I was experiencing the very presence of God, experiencing the essence of the Holy Spirit. And I couldn't deny it. I couldn't explain it away anymore. There was no way I could have tricked myself into feeling that. It was completely a new foreign experience in every way. And up until that moment, I was still very unconvinced of God's existence. And then it was like a complete light switch. After a bit, I called my now husband, who was now just my friend at the time, about my encounter, telling him he was right about everything and how absolutely astounding the experience was and how amazing yet honestly frightening God actually exists. And all of a sudden, I realized that indeed there is an omnipotent, omniscient being who's been watching me and judging me my entire life. That's a pretty harrowing realization. I was both relieved that God exists because now life actually has purpose and there is such a thing as goodness, but I was also frightened because this means I really do have to make some extreme lifestyle changes. And shortly after that experience, I was thoroughly convinced of God's existence and began to dive into apologetics. Apologetics, if you don't know, are reasoned arguments in defense of the Christian belief that helps to explain and clarify the gospel. And I found that historical evidence actually is in favor of Christ's crucifixion and his resurrection. No matter how you look at it, if you're a historian and you're studying the evidence of Jesus's life, you have to conclude that he died on the cross, and the evidence shows that he was indeed resurrected. A non-believer historian will just sort of tell you that the evidence suggests that something kind of bizarre happened, but it can't possibly be true that he resurrected. And if Jesus did not rise from the dead, the Christian faith is in vain. But the evidence for the resurrection of Christ is actually overwhelming. There's the discovery of Jesus's empty tomb, the appearances of Jesus alive after his death, and the disciples' belief that Jesus rose from the dead and their willingness to undergo ostracization, excruciating torture, and death for their belief in Jesus as God after they personally witnessed his resurrection. All of the apostles actually fled during Christ's arrest except for John, and he was the only one to not die a martyr. And also, Jesus's female followers did not flee, which is a win for the ladies, but all of the apostles came back to Jesus after he resurrected, except for Judas Iscariot, of course. And the apostles were so certain of Christ's divinity that they underwent extreme, horrible deaths. I mean, Peter was crucified upside down, Paul was beheaded, Andrew was crucified, Thomas was killed, Matthias was burned to death, and I think maybe Simon or the other Judas was sawn in half, cut in half, all because they knew that Christ was God. If they did not actually witness the resurrection, why would they be willing to undergo such extreme pain? And when I discovered that Jesus' resurrection has as much evidence as any other major event in history, I became even more solidified in my belief in him as the one true God. By the way, my favorite apologists include David Wood and the late and wonderful Nabil Qureshi Frank Turek, and Melissa Dougherty. All four are on YouTube, and I encourage you all to listen to their videos and read Nabil Qureshi's Seeking Allah, Finding Jesus, and No God But One Allah or Jesus, which are absolutely wonderful books. Anyways, with the combination of the abundant evidence for Jesus's divinity and my own personal encounter with God through an Orthodox prayer, I was completely convinced of Christianity and became a catechumen, which is a convert under instruction before baptism, and then shortly after I was baptized. And my baptism was one of the happiest days of my life. I had so many inexplicable realizations about God afterwards, after my baptism and taking my first communion. Like, I realized that practically all of the notions I had about God were completely false and unfounded. The mystery of God became so much more clear after my baptism. Sorry, I'm stuttering now. He became much more mysterious than he was to me before. The baptism really humbled me. I also finally decided to start dating my now husband right after my baptism. He wanted to date for months, but I kept telling him I wanted to wait until after I got baptized so I could focus on God. And right after my baptism, stuttering, I felt a huge desire to be with him, and now we're married and have a baby on the way after 7 years of knowing each other. I truly believe that he's the man God had in store for me, but that's really a story for another time. And that is essentially my testimony, how I went from atheist to pagan to Orthodox Christian. So someone asked what has changed in my life since becoming Christian. And I'll say Christian Jasmine and atheist/pagan Jasmine are two very different people. When you stop essentially being your own God and begin to repent for your sins, a lot changes. The biggest thing that's changed in my daily life is whenever I realize that my conduct or thought pattern is sinful, I repent and I change my behavior or my attitude immediately. Road rage, Jesus prayer, and calm down. Don't want to follow my husband's leadership? Jesus prayer and submit. Feeling a little bit greedy, Jesus prayer and give generously. Feeling despondent, Jesus prayer and be grateful for what I have, etc., etc. And now that I am aware of sin, of what sin is and how grave the consequences of sin are, every time that I find myself stumbling, which is very often, I ask for forgiveness and for strength to do better, and I earnestly try to do better, which has blessed my life in so many ways. Before God, I didn't really have a good reason to do better since I wasn't the arbiter of my own morality, but now I know how important it is to do better, and through Christ, I actually am able to. And that is a transformative realization. I bring all of my problems to God now. I cast all of my anxieties onto Him, and to say it's been impactful would be an understatement. Trying to be more holy instead of just trying to be more happy is actually where true, lasting joy lies. I no longer see self-sacrifice as something negative. Instead of doing what makes me happy, or be only around people who serve me, or do only the things that make me feel good, I find so much beauty and fulfillment in sacrificial love now, in serving others even when they don't serve me back. For instance, with my pregnancy, there's so much sacrifice when it comes to pregnancy. There are a lot of challenges that go hand in hand with it, and raising a child is very difficult, but now I see sacrificial love as something beautiful and God ordained, and all of the challenges with pregnancy now are completely handleable. I also pour a lot more integrity and effort into my work. I realized that you don't have to be a wealthy philanthropist or charity organizer to glorify God with your work. If you show up with good intentions, with integrity, with honesty, and a willingness to work hard, then you can glorify God in many professions. Working as a construction worker, at a restaurant, as a receptionist, or a barista, it's not necessarily what you do, but how you do it that matters. And if you genuinely want to serve others and bless them, that is what matters. Another gigantic change that occurred was that I began to embrace femininity. I wouldn't say that I was masculine before I converted, but according to my husband, I was like a 7 or an 8 out of 10 on the femininity scale, but I think he was being generous. I was a lot more quarrelsome before, a lot less flexible and accommodating, and now I find beauty in deference, in accommodation, in gentleness, in submitting to my husband. I found practically no beauty in any of those characteristics before I converted. I thought that I had to be fierce and ruthless to get ahead in life and to accomplish things, but little did I know I could implement so much positive change while operating in my feminine. And not only has my marriage benefited from that so much, but also my personal life and my business life, how I deal with friends, family, and clients in business cultivates so much more peace and harmony. Why Orthodoxy instead of Catholicism or Protestantism or non-denominationalism? I love this quote by Seraphim Rose. In only one place is there to be found the fount of true teaching coming from God himself, not diminished over the centuries, but ever fresh, being one and the same in all those who truly teach it, leading those who follow it to eternal salvation. This place is the Orthodox Church of Christ. The fount is the grace of the Holy Spirit, and the true teachers of the divine doctrine that issues from the fount are the Holy Fathers of the Orthodox Church. In the Orthodox Church, the scriptures are preserved without falsification, without addition or curtailment. In the Orthodox Church, the scriptures are read without distortion, and thus the Orthodox Church is the custodian of truth because it possesses Holy Scripture, not its text only, but also its correct interpretation. Holy Orthodoxy has been around since before the New Testament Holy Scriptures were even put to paper and compiled. The Church is the one church that knows the original Greek of the New Testament and to use the same Old Testament that Christ himself used. The Bible is actually based on the Orthodox Church. The Bible was not compiled as we know it until the First Ecumenical Council in around the year 300, 270 years after the death and resurrection of Christ. And from 33 AD to 300, a ton of documents were produced that explained church beliefs and procedure taught by the apostles and those they taught. So there is a litany of documents that exist outside of the Bible that were written by the apostles and their direct students that outline procedure and such. Confession was taught from the very beginning, along with incense, the iconostasis, icons, veneration of saints, praying to saints, which is not the same as worshiping or asking for forgiveness. It is not idolatrous, communion, baptism, and more. Through the eras of pagan persecution and heresies, Orthodox Christians remained faithful to the Word of God and compiled the books of the apostles into the New Testament and defended and expounded Christian teachings such as the Trinity and Christ's incarnation against all heresy. All of the ancient Christian creeds, such as the Nicene Creed, were also written by Orthodox Christians. One lives as an Orthodox Christian by doing as Christ instructed, by denying themselves, taking up their cross, and following Christ. God generously gives his grace, and we try to do our very best to live in love with him. We believe that to remain faithful to Christ, we must remain faithful to the whole truth and cannot divide his body or change his words, as to do so is to deny Christ's words and those of his apostles. But hey, don't take my word for it. I encourage my audience to do research for yourself into the Orthodox Church and to pray to God for guidance, and I have confidence that you will find the fullness of God's grace within the Orthodox Church. Well, that is my entire testimony. Thank you all so much for watching. Please do like and subscribe, and if you'd like to, you can get a membership to my channel to support my channel. There are also some perks involved with that, like priority reply to comments, members only polls, and connecting on social media and more. Thank you again for watching, and may God bless you.